104.5, the team, your home for New York sports. Some serious weird goings-on in Buffalo. Sal Maiorana is going to make sense of it all for us. He's from the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle. Sal, we wake up yesterday morning to Doug Whaley no longer being a member of the Buffalo Bills staff. Why now?
Well, I mean, this was coming. We all knew this really back in January, especially after he had his meltdown press conference at the end of the season. You could tell very clearly that the Pagulas we're starting to doubt whether Doug Whaley could be the guy moving forward. But the reason you don't do it then, a lot of people talked about, well, once you fired Rex, why didn't you just fire Whaley and get it over with? Well, the problem is that Whaley and all of his scouts, the personnel guys, they had done all the work in the college football season, scouting the prospects and breaking down all the film. So they have all that information. Then they were going to go to the Senior Bowl, the pro days, the combine, and all that. So you don't want to throw all that work away. So they waited until after the draft, which made a lot of sense to me. I mean, Doug Whaley, Pagula said yesterday that Whaley put the draft together. That may have been the case, but we all know Sean McDermott was pulling the strings behind the scenes. However, like I said, Whaley and his scouts did all the legwork leading up to the draft, and it wasn't like they're going to tank the draft because they knew they were going to get fired. I mean, their reputations are on the line, too. And years from now, we'll look back on this draft, and while we might call it Sean McDermott's draft, we're going to know that, Whaley and his crew were the guys that did the legwork behind these players. So I understood the move completely. It had to be done. Doug Whaley's time here was through. They've made it very clear that Sean McDermott is the guy leading the charge, and I was fine with it. So good for the Bills.
For those that may not remember that meltdown press conference, take us through that again and some of the questions. You were there in the room of what Whaley was saying to the media that day.
Well, I mean, he just had no answers for things he should have had answers for. He claimed that he wasn't privy to the conversation between the owner and Rex Ryan that led to Ryan being fired. He claimed he wasn't privy to the information about what Anthony Lynn did or didn't know about benching Tyrod Taylor for the final game of the season, and he just came off like a general buffoon, that has been Whaley's MO. He's a pretty smart guy, but he never comes off looking smart when he talks to the media. He just has, he has trouble with it, and he does not give a good face to the organization. So, and what happened that day, too, is the Bills PR staff, stupidly stood there and let this guy go up in flames, and it got worse and worse the longer the press conference went. When that was over with, that pretty much had sealed the fate, I think, of Whaley, and it certainly sealed the fate of their vice president of PR, Scott Berchtold, who they moved up. They didn't fire him, but they basically removed him from that position. So, yeah, it was a bad, bad day for everybody in the organization. And, the Bills were laughing stocks for about 2 or 3 news cycles after that press conference. So I think that was the final nail in Doug Whaley's coffin for sure.
Sal Maiorana of the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle read this right now on 104.5 the team. So, Sal, is the bloodletting over? Is Doug Whaley and his scouting department the end of who's going to be out in Buffalo?
Well, I mean, there's still the matter of, Jim Overdorf has been there forever. He's their salary cap guy, their contract guy, but he predates, he predates a lot of people in the organization. I mean, he predates Russ Brandon. So we're looking at, probably 30 years of employ for Overdorf. There's talk that, whenever the new general manager is named, and Pagula even said it yesterday, Jim Overdorf will be evaluated by the new GM, and if they want to keep him on, they will. But he really is the only other guy left in the organization who would matter that the Bills might get rid of. So we'll have to wait to see who the GM is. But other than that, they blew out the whole scouting staff. They're starting from scratch in that department. So now it's a matter of who are they going to hire as opposed to who they're going to fire.
Who are some of the candidates you've heard that are in the mix for that GM job?
Well, I mean, anybody who has ties to McDermott. I mean, there's a couple guys from his Carolina days. Brett Veach is one of them. He's now at Kansas City, who works with Andy Reid, who, of course, is McDermott's mentor. Reid speaks very highly of this guy. I couldn't tell you one thing about him. The other guy is Brandon Beane, who's currently, I think, the assistant GM or maybe the pro personnel guy at the Panthers. That's a very obvious tie, too. McDermott just worked there for 6 years. So those are two guys whose names have come to the forefront. But, these things, a lot of times, there'll be a guy who you've never heard of who ends up being the candidate that they pick. So it's way too early in the process to even think about it. But, like I said, whoever they're going to hire is going to be a guy that most of us have never even heard of.
Sal Maiorana with us right now, 104.5 The Team. So, Sal, regardless of whose draft it was, what did you think of the Bills' overall draft?
Well, again, who knows? I mean, I'll tell you in 2 or 3 years. But on the surface, I love what they did in the first 2 rounds. They addressed their two biggest glaring needs, cornerback and wide receiver. And what was great about the first round, as we know, they made that trade down with the Chiefs, and they still got a guy who I think could come right in and start, Tre'Davious White. And most importantly, they got a first-round draft pick next year. That was I thought, a great job by the Bills to pull that off. The second round, they got a wide receiver who I really liked. At the Combine, I wrote about him, saying I hope the Bills have a chance to get him. And obviously they felt the same way because they actually traded up in the second round to get Zay Jones, who's the all-time leading college football pass catcher. So I love that move. They got an offensive lineman also in the second round. They traded up to get him. I wasn't crazy about that. They gave up 2 fifth-round draft picks, which, you think, okay, big deal. But the Bills need every draft pick possible. And I didn't like that they went up to get this guy, who really isn't even a right tackle by trade. He played left tackle, and I've heard some people project him to be a guard in the NFL. What they really needed was a right tackle. So if he ends up coming in and playing right tackle and wins that job, then it was a great job by the Bills. But if not, that was a bit of a dubious pick. And then the other guys, they picked 2 linebackers. They're special teams guys. And I love picking Nathan Peterman, the quarterback. He was another guy that I thought the Bills, I thought they'd be crazy to pick a quarterback in the first round. There's been a lot of talk about that. I'm glad they didn't do that. But I actually thought Peterman would be a good idea as early as the 3rd round. And they ended up getting him in the 5th round. Again, who knows? He might just end up being a solid backup. But at least he's a kid who's played in a pro-style offense. And there's a lot of good check marks. The only thing that's a negative about him right now is he doesn't have that great arm strength. But, as McDermott pointed out, there's a lot of guys in the NFL who don't have elite arm strength, yet they're pretty darn good quarterbacks. So, all in all, it looks good on paper. We'll have to see once they start playing real games.
You could add Nathan Peterman to the list of athletes like Leonard Fournette, Dalvin Cook, Jameis Winston, Deshaun Watson, Lamar Jackson, of people who have torn up my beloved Syracuse Orange defense in their career. If Peterman's on this team, you have 4 quarterbacks. They're not going to go into the regular season with 4 quarterbacks, though, are they?
No, probably not. They've got T.J. Yates, who's a nobody veteran free agent that they, will have in the mix to be the backup. They'll have Cardell Jones, and they'll have Peterman. So there'll be a battle for that backup job, and I would think that somebody will probably get cut. It very well could be Peterman. It depends. I mean, he has to transition to this next level. It's a big jump. Cardell Jones is by no means, proven that he's ready to make the jump. He might be the guy who gets cut. Or, the Jets cut 4 quarterbacks last year, so maybe they do keep a guy. Maybe a guy gets hurt and they can IR him for the year. So there's a lot of things that have to go on before we can determine, how many guys they'll carry.
Sal, who thought it would be even more interesting after Rex was gone, but the Bills continued to, dominate the news pages, and you are the man with the non-biased reports. We appreciate you.
All right, guys, no problem.